You're watching Face to Face with me, your host Tim Vince, and I am delighted to be joined by Bishop Dr. Desmond Jaddoo. Great pleasure, Desmond, and you are the chair of the Windrush National Organisation. So I'm here to learn from you, and I think our viewers will be very interested to hear of the journey that you have gone through and the Windrush generation have gone through. So welcome to Face to Face.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
And you are based in Birmingham. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, Desmond, first.
Me? Well, I was born in Birmingham. Both my parents are from Jamaica. I have a unique twist that I'm what they call Jamaican Indian as well, meaning that my grandfather left India back in the late 1800s and went to Jamaica. And then my mum met my dad. My mother came to the UK first in 1960, followed by my father in 1961. And a few years later, I popped up. Yeah. I made my entrance.
And Desmond, you know, people know about Windrush, I think because of the scandal actually, but in earlier life, I don't think anyone really heard of this amazing story of it's named after a ship.
That's right. I mean, growing up, I used to hear my parents talk about the boat, people who came over on the boat. So I was always mystified in what's this boat that they always talked about. And prior to the Windrush scandal, I got involved in various organizations where we learnt about the Empire Windrush, being a former Nazi troop ship, and then after the war, it was taken over by the British. And I think the importance of that is the background to where the ship came from in the first place. But then that is the ship that in May 1948 left Kingston Harbour in Jamaica and made that voyage to the UK and docked at Tilbury on the 22nd of June 1948.
Wow, so that we're now in the 75th anniversary year.
That's right. This year's Windrush 75. There'll be a whole plethora of events. There'll be a national service at Southwark Cathedral, where I am in Birmingham. We're having a service. So many of our colleagues around the country will be having a service of commemoration and celebration, because one of the things we have to do is we have to celebrate the contributions of our elders, because they were pioneers. Jeremiah 29, biblically, that's the journey they took. They came to the UK that was ravaged after World War II, and the call went out. And if you imagine, this is my story that I always like to tell people. If you imagine people in a sun-drenched Caribbean island, a crop duster flies over and drops leaflets. We need your help to rebuild the UK. But what many people don't understand, Tim, is that our elders actually paid their fare to come to the UK. Wow. They paid their passages themselves. I remember my mother was booked on a ship, and she told me she had a shop in Kingston, and she sent a message to her father, please sell my cow and goat so I can actually buy a plane ticket instead. So they all made that sacrifice to come here, and many people don't get that.
I don't think they do. I think they see it completely the other way around, that actually we, well, I would say I see it, that there was a little bit of hoodwinking going on. But in terms of your motivation, people would portray it. And when I say your, I mean, I'm not talking about Ross Perot, you people. It's the motivation that would be slightly falsified, saying, oh, well, they were coming to better their lives because, you know, they were sold a story of the streets being paved with gold.
Yes, there was that side of it, but there was pride. Because what a lot of people got to understand is, if we focus on Jamaica, that's where my parents are from. Yeah. At King's House, and note the name of it, King's House exists today, and it's actually reverted now back to a king. Wow. Because King's House remained its name. It was never changed to Queen's House when the Queen was on the throne. But the Union flag flew over Jamaica. Yeah. It came down in 1962 when Jamaica had independence. My mother, when she went to school, she used to sing God Save the King. Then that national anthem became God Save the Queen. Yeah. And one of the things is people from a lot of the Caribbean islands, parts of Africa, the South Asian subcontinent, for example, they, as far as it was concerned, were told you're British. Although they were born in the Caribbean, in this case Jamaica, they were told you're British.
Yeah.
So as far as they're concerned, Britain called and they answered that call because I am going to my country. I have pride in the Union Jack. I have pride in the Queen, and it is my civic duty to answer that call to go and rebuild what they considered to be their actual mother country.
So it's really moving, I have to say that. And the question is, where did it all go wrong?
Unfortunately, it went wrong on day one, didn't it? I mean, the Empire Windrush sailed into the Thames Estuary on the 21st of June. But there was a emergency motion put by Labour MPs on the Clement Attlee to actually turn the ship around and send them to Ghana to pick peanuts. So that's where it all started.
It's outrageous, outrageous.
And that's the thing. So it all went wrong from day one. And when they arrived on the 22nd of June, as opposed to going to the land of hope, they ended up in what I call a baptism of fire. Because if you imagine in the Caribbean, no one was called things like the N-word or a black whatever, you know, they were just people. And one of the important things as well, Tim, is that people in the Caribbean, there were white people, there were Asian people, there were people from Syria. I mean, today the motto of Jamaica is out of many one people, which is actual fact.
Wow.
Now, if you imagine that, they come here to their mother country, and the first thing, they haven't got anywhere to go. They go looking for lodgings and they're told, no blacks, no Irish, no dogs. There are stories of people having to sleep in disused bomb shelters, which were underground stations, for example. People were getting jobs, but they were de-skilled. People came here as school teachers and told that your qualifications, by the way, which came through English institutions, were not valid here. You have to be retrained. They were told point blank, you only can do manual jobs, for example, unskilled labor. But many of them still did that because they came here with the hope of a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. I still laugh when I hear my mother said, I came here with a 10-year plan. I said, well, you can't count beyond 10 then, Mum, can you? And she calls me a cheeky so-and-so. But importantly, they came here with vision.
Yeah, amazing. It's an amazing story and a tragedy as well, really, because you also had, you say British, you also had a Christian framework in Jamaica. And sadly, when we look at the UK today, Great Britain, it's not so great.
The thing about it is we have to remember the resilience of our elders. And it is their faith that brought them through. And it wasn't preaching and praying, clapping hands, shouting hallelujah, praise the Lord.
But it was a framework.
Yeah, but they put those values into practice. No blacks, no Irish, no dogs. They bought houses. The same houses they were turned away from, they purchased them. How did they purchase them? They threw partner, which is everyone putting money into a pool. This week, Tim, it's your turn. Next week, it's someone else's. And they used the money from partner to buy houses. But then they weren't selfish and purchased the houses and said, it's just for my family. They would then rent rooms out to friends. Many of us had a lot of aunts and uncles. The reason was it was that sense of community. They weren't blood on aunt and uncles, but they were spiritual aunt and uncles. Meaning like one person would go to work, one person would stay at home rather, and everyone else would go to work. They then would pay that person to look after the kids. So like 10 children, one person looks after them for the day. It allows other people to go out to work. The bed shift system, you know, someone's on daytime shift, someone's on night shift.
So it's survival.
Yeah, so it is that survival element. But why were they able to adapt that? Well, back home in the Caribbean, there was no Sky TV at the time, there was no Xbox, there were no mobile phones either, or smartphones for that matter. It was a case of children going to school, parents going to work, getting back in the evening, having a wash, having dinner, getting on with your homework. Saturday, tidy up around the house, get the washing done, get all the ironing done so that your school uniforms are ready for Monday morning. But Sunday, they look so forward to Sunday. Sunday either to go to church to get that spiritual upliftment, listen to the sermon. The young lads would go to probably see the girl who lives across the road because that's the only time during Sunday school they get away with chatting to them, for example. Or some just went merely to play after church service or looking forward to the ice cream. But no matter the reason, church was the center point of the community. And that's where that godliness and that clinging together came in. That was the unity. And that bounded them together so that when they came here, even if some of them didn't know each other, the values were identical. And it's because of what they had in common is why they steamed through the whole issue of the discrimination that they faced. But I think the hardest discrimination that many of them faced was being turned away from church.
Wow.
My wife was one of those people. She remembers that. She remembers in 1969, and that's very recently compared to others. They moved from one part of Birmingham, Aston. She's christened Anglican. Her mum was from Barbados. Now, if anyone knows anything about Barbados, the Anglican Church is the main church in Barbados. Imagine, they moved to an area of Birmingham called Edgbaston. They go to the church up the road, only to be told, you're dressed wonderfully, you sing great, but please don't come back next week, you're upsetting the congregation.
It's a shocker, absolutely shocker.
The biggest culprits of this was the Church of England, the Baptist Church, and also the Methodists as well. There were some issues with Roman Catholic Church, and the Roman Catholic Church itself, if you don't know
strong
this,
out in the
it's very strong, but it's strong in countries such as Montserrat. Because remember, people in Montserrat, they're from Irish descent. So, you know, you've got this tall black guy walking down the road and his name's William Kelly, for example. I mean, my wife's stepdad, may rest in peace, was from Montserrat. And she's got a brother called William O'Brien.
Yes.
You know, and that's the thing. So the whole roots that people came here and perceived they had here were actually uprooted by the system here and the discrimination that they faced.
So basically, you know, over our lifetimes, there's been changes for the better, and then suddenly this scandal hits. I can't remember whether it was Teresa May or one of our, you know, glorious prime ministers who decided that they were persona non grata and had to be shipped back.
To be honest, this all started back in 2003.
Okay.
Jamaica, for which the king today is still the head of state. Barbados recently went independent.
Okay, I didn't know that.
But the king is still head of state because there is a governor general there. Now, the important thing to remember from that, in 2003, Jamaica became the only Caribbean island where you required a visa to enter the UK. At that time, I always say that the British government thought that every Jamaican is a yardie drug dealer. That was my paraphrasing of it. In 2007, they brought out the Immigration and Borders Bill. That was brought out by Liam Byrne, who is still the MP for Hodge Hill in Birmingham today.
So he was famous for being the Chief Secretary to the Treasury and saying there's no money left.
The little note. The little note. I think the photocopies have circulated of that. But what they did, they brought out this bill. Now, 2010 comes a coalition government under pressure to control immigration. They see this act, they say, oh, that's a good idea, but let's ramp it up. And that was the birth of the hostile environment, handed then to Teresa May, for which they then cranked that up. Meaning if you are
But when you say the hostile environment, who did initiate it then? I thought it was Teresa May when she was Home Secretary.
It was cranked up under Teresa May, but we're talking about the foundation that relies upon the 2007 Immigration Act, which Labour put in place. Now, Teresa May cranked that up even further. So the seeds were sown, and all she did was nurture and water the plant and let the plant start to bloom. But what it bloomed...
After having said, as Tory chairman, you know, we don't want the Conservative Party to be the nasty party. And yet in this regard, it became so.
I think for many years, I've heard we are the party of social justice and equality. Unfortunately, they got that wrong. Many people from about 2012, 2013, I've been involved in this. And I had people come to me and say that, I've just lost my job. I can't produce a passport. I said, well, apply for one. They said, I have, but they said that I have no right to be here. Then I asked the question, where are you from? One lady told me she's from St. Kitts. She came in the UK in 1970. She was 10 years old when she arrived. She's never seen, I said...
Never needed a passport.
Yeah, during the 1980s, I said, did you not naturalise? She said, well, I'm not going anywhere. I don't need a passport. You know, I hated the plane ride to the UK, and I'm not going back in the plane again. I'm not prepared to leave the country ever again. But then that caused a downward spiral. Many people lost their jobs, some lost their homes, they lost their family, they lost their livelihood. Some people lost their lives as well. They were told, you have no right to be here. The 1971 Immigration Act, Tim, is the act that they rely upon for people to have the right of abode. So anyone in the UK before the 1st of January 1973, from one of the Commonwealth countries, they had a right to be in the UK. But common sense didn't prevail. Because someone was unable to produce a passport, they were sacked from their job. When they went to the Home Office, you have no right to be here. Landing cards were destroyed, but importantly, there were other verification.
Just picking up on landing cards. So did they use those and hand them over in trust, and then someone destroyed them?
Well, they take the landing cards at the airport.
Yeah, got it.
So these, as far as we understood, should have been archived.
They're the records.
Because those are their records. But the point is, there were other key validating points which they could have gone to, which I'll come on to in a second. But what happened with this, there was just no common sense. So if you imagine, someone's been here for 40, 50 years, married, they own a home, they've got children, they've got grandchildren, they went to school here, they've got a job in the UK, their whole career was in the UK, the whole of their adult life was in the UK. And then they're told, you have no right to be here. You're an illegal immigrant.
It's one of the worst things in modern times, I think, what happened.
We've seen people have nervous...
And they did actually fly people back. I mean, it was stopped, but quite a number were shipped out.
We were told about 26 went back, but I think there's a lot more than that as well, because some came here as children to join their parents. And when they came here to join their parents, they've got into trouble with the law, for example, and they sent them back as well. But
I wanted to just take a step back, because we may need more than one program, by the way. But taking a step back, you know, as a Christian and a bishop and a leader of the church, how do you bring the scriptures in, and not only in terms of challenging the powers that be, you know, speaking truth to power, but also in encouraging those who are really victims of this scandal?
One of the biggest issues we've had with this is trust. Love thy neighbour as thyself. We are the government that respects the Windrush generation. We are sorry for what we've done. But unfortunately, you know, you have to demonstrate that. And I think, as I said to you earlier, the Windrush generation demonstrated their godly values. Government, I think, still are giving words and not commitment, and they have to demonstrate what they're saying. And the important thing is the hostile environment. We've always argued that the hostile environment should be suspended because it's being misapplied. And the greatest reason is this. The Wendy Williams review, where she came up with 30 recommendations into the Windrush scandal. Case study number 1 is my case, a lady called Gloria. Gloria met me in 2013. I've been on that journey with Gloria for the past 10 years. She lost her job. She owned a home. They still own the home today, but sadly her husband's now passed away. And if I say to you, Tim, in 2018, I encouraged her to go to Solihull, the immigration office there. The same document she had in her possession in 2013, she went there in 2018. She was granted status within 1 hour. She left there with a biometric residence permit and a form to apply for British citizenship. She now has her British passport. What was the difference?
Exactly.
That's the point. There was no difference at all. And her medical records is what validated her, for the simple reason. Every time a child came into the UK, the first thing you've got to do is go to a doctor and get your vaccination report checked.
Could I ask, where does the sort of Race Relations Act fit into this? I mean, do they care about race relations when they can do, one part of government can implement something that's just so diametrically opposed to respecting people?
I think the best way to describe this is we've had the recent saga at the royal reception. Yeah. And I always say
with
this.
Lady Hussey.
Yes.
Yeah.
What is it to be, how are you British? And is it the colour of your skin that defines whether or not you're British? And that's all I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Because what happened with the Windrush scandal, I sincerely believe if you were not white, you were considered to be an immigrant if you didn't have a British passport. I think this week I've been asked where have I come from, and I love to answer that. I said, well,
Birmingham.
Yeah. Well, I go into more detail than that. I said, well, I was born at Heathfield Road Maternity Hospital in Handsworth. It's now been demolished. Oh, by the way, that's Birmingham. So that's where I came from. Yeah. I said, my mum went in there pregnant, and when she came out with a little bundle of joy.
And who we'll learn a lot more about in years to come. Yeah, so I'm just trying to unpack now, how do we address it? I mean, you're addressing it in a big way with the Windrush organisation, but how can those, in the wider church, internalise the reality?
I think for far too long, the church, we've been preaching Holy Spirit, but we've not been preaching equality, social justice. The church is the pivotal, it's the centrifugal point of our communities. And the church has got to be political, even with a small p. Because when we see injustice, we can't just pray, we have to act. The church is the oldest institution within our communities.
Yeah.
And I make no apologies for saying it's an institution, because it is an institution, but it's the only permanent institution in our communities. I mean, and many of the times we pride ourselves on buying the church buildings that our people from our community were turned away from. Yeah. We purchased those churches. So the church is a centre point, and people look to the church and look to their pastors, their bishops, for leadership.
And do you think that, the race issue has been somehow drowned out by other issues that have been sort of jumped on the bandwagon or piggybacked on racial justice, and then all the other justices that are out there, and people sticking their hands to roads, and there's justice for pretty well everything else, that folks in especially Britain have sort of lost the core issue.
Well, as far as there are some people in the school of thought that there is no race issue in Britain. The Race Relations Act being merged into the 2010 Equality Act placed race way down the agenda. Now, however, we do have a love affair with the American dream, because as soon as America coughs, Britain gets a cold. Yeah. The point being, if we look at George Floyd, that went viral across the world. Yeah. But what was happening in Britain has always been missed. Yeah. And the key element here is for the Windrush generation is that the colour of their skin is what made them immigrants. Yeah. And despite being speeches in Parliament, they're British, they said that they contradict it. These immigrants came here, but they are British. Well, if you're British, you can't be an immigrant.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so basically we're talking about a journey, and we haven't reached the destination yet. And I do remember a book written by Clifford Hill, at Moggahanger Park, entitled "Free at Last," had a question mark on it, because there's a lot of evangelicals think, oh well, we're part of the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade with William Wilberforce, so it's job done. But there's more to do.
Of course there is. I mean, in Jamaica, when they had emancipation, I went to Morant Bay not so long ago in St. Thomas, and that's where Paul Bogle and George William Gordon were hung for saying that you freed us, but we can't vote. Yeah. So there are still, there are caveats attached, there are strings attached. Yeah.
Desmond, what a pleasure. First time we've been face to face, and I look forward to winging you or reeling you back down from Birmingham. It'll be a pleasure to go in more detail. It's such an important subject.
Be a pleasure for me as well, and thanks for having me.
Bless you. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for joining us, and join us again face to face.